No, I do not think there are any disadvantages.
If you don't have the right math class and if you don't have the right science class, you're not going to understand how to do things in different...
Not really, because you get the same amount of time for each subject as you're learning it if you're learning it together.
They might get confused between the two subjects sometimes.
I think it might place more demands on the teacher to be versed in, you know, a content area that might not be his or her first love or first knowledge, but no. As far as a strategy for learning, that cross-curricular type of learning, I don't see any downside to.
Time. State requirements of the TEKS, there's just so many TEKS and not enough time. And when I have to implement it with the other curriculums, that's taking time away from the time I need to take them with TEKS. So that's the biggest problem, is this thing called standardized testing of the actual statewide curriculum. I would love to have it only science, math related. However, I can't do that because of the state requirements of the TEKS. I must cover these objectives.
Some kids that think they're not good at math will all of a sudden think they're not good at science either. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you don't think you're good at one, then you don't think you're good at the other. But again, if you're good at one, then you can obviously see the advantages of being good with the other.
I think that sometimes students that struggle with math get discouraged or easily turn away from it, even though I sometimes find that the opposite of that happens. Students that struggle, maybe once they see how it's applied in science class, actually the light bulb turns on and they realize, wow, I can do this, and this actually does mean something, and I will use this someday. You know? So both, there's a disadvantage and an advantage to collaborating with the two.
There's an opportunity to lose the focus of the math. Most people kind of take that opportunity, and so then whatever else is kind of, you know, in there that makes it more engaging to them, that becomes the focus, even if it really shouldn't have been in the first place.
Do you think it's more of a disadvantage to mix the math with the science, or like in this math class, bring the science in, or do you think it'd be more of a disadvantage in the science class to bring in the math?
I know that when my science teacher integrates the math, it tends to work really well. And especially for me if it's being emphasized in there. So I think that it's more of a disadvantage to the math.
We were doing densities. We had to do, in science class when we were doing densities, we had to use multiplication and everything.
We did some stations for basic skills where we had to measure we had to find the weight of like a grain of sand. So we had to use the scientific gram scale, the scientific gram scales to do that. Then we had to calculate it on our paper and show our work.
Converting metric system, and probably like when you do formulas with an unknown number, like it's sort of similar to like I remember in 7th grade when we needed to the components like H2O, and we were trying to figure out the like how many of like these specific elements would be in this element, because it always needs to be 8, so we need to figure out that. So I think that's pretty similar to like unknown numbers.
When we were doing station work and we had to create a graph or a chart and then convert like milliliters, liters, grams, and milligrams and things like that.
We had to work with numbers a lot, like measuring stuff.
I integrated science into it. A lot of the times when we do some sort of a bouncing of a ball, so we can actually see the decay at rate. So it goes like a quadratic function, another quadratic function, and the height of the ball is getting less and less and less as the ball absorbs the energy, but we see it as the less distance as we bounce a ball. And of course, then we can plot the quadratics of each of the bounces.
And you do one with distance over time graphs.
I do lots with distance over time graphs with the Ranger and the CBR. So yeah, all of those things. I even have one where they actually take a stopwatch and we find their walking rates, and we apply that with ratio proportion to find out if you're walking like 20 meters in 16 seconds, how long would it take you to walk a mile, or 1,000 meters. So they actually see it a little bit with meters, but then they apply it to a much longer distance to actually see what it should
We did
be.
this cross-curricular assignment in our cluster, and we had math, science, and it was about the 1900 hurricane in Galveston. And we talked about the amount of water that moved across the island. We talked about hurricanes in the science class, about the whole strength and power of the hurricane and the size of the storm surge. And then we actually went down to Galveston and saw the devastation that was down there. We saw the went and saw the 1900 storm, and took the students out to show them the seawall, about how much it had been built up, and then the gradual slope of the island towards the back half, and then went by the the Moody Mansion, and there's a fence out front that's about 4 foot tall, 3 foot tall. That's originally an 8 foot tall fence, but because of the filling in of the island from the front to the back, it's been like it's just like a little petty fence now. So it's kind of cool to show the kids the real world things that happened as a result of the math and science that weren't really understood.
Dimensional analysis would be one that kind of comes to mind. And then hopefully we're planning on doing the Barbie bungee jumping and actually integrating it between the two of us later on this school year. So.
And how does that go? What are you doing now?
You actually create bungees out of rubber bands and try to determine, given the distance that they're going to be jumping, how many rubber bands you might need. So you maybe estimate with 5 rubber bands, 10 rubber bands, and then without actually being able to do this larger distance, say, oh, I'm going to need 50 rubber bands. Then we all test it and we see who crash lands.
That's cool.
Who's closest.
Because there are, like if you're going to become a rocket technician, you're going to need to know a lot of math and science at the same time. And there are several important jobs, like being a doctor, that require both integration of math and science.
How about just regular jobs? So like in anybody's job, you think they use math and science at the same time?
Yes. Well, my dad owns a toy store, so he has to learn. He also has to work the cash register and know like what kind of things that people like to buy. So there's kind of like a mental science there, I guess.
Like a lot of stuff, like just everyday activities, like cooking and stuff like that. And I don't know, a lot of stuff.
If you want to become an engineer, like a scientific engineer, I think math helps you a lot, because if you want to do calculus, then a lot of, I know in college, a lot of calculus is involved and a lot of advanced stuff. So, like converting both of those, integrating both of those together, I think would be a good benefit. And
Think it
also
helps us prepare for real world situations. Because like when you're younger, you can make connections now, and then you can still make those connections as you grow up.
And I'll be doing even some rudimentary carpentry project, and just a knowledge of the mathematical skills involved in that would be
Like measurements.
extremely helpful. It happens in cooking. There you're going to need a basic understanding of some science, or it certainly would help, as well as measurement and mathematics, and dealing with your proportions and measurements. So sure, it happens throughout life.
If you integrate the two, it's very easy to see where they could use them. When they're calculating their speed, when they start to drive, and they try to figure out how close they should be to the car in front of them before they can stop on time and not rear end somebody. When they're doing analysis of any kind of experiment they may be doing, whether it be a interview with certain kids for their science fair project, or if it's you can't test science without math, you can't test math without science. Looking at the old test, the test, the STAR, the TAGS test, the two are very integrated, and so they actually use one to test the other, and the math to test the science to test the math.
How about like when they're away from school completely, though? When they're like at their house, or after they graduated from college, or where would they be using both in real world?
In the real world, you use math to budget. you got so much money coming in, you can't spend more than that, or else you end up like the U.S. government, and you just keep going into further and further deficit. They're going to foreclose on your house and stuff like that. Figuring out the tax, figuring out mileage in your car, to figure out air pressure. There's all kind of real world applications to everything they're learning in their classes. Even if they have fish tanks, testing the pH, make sure the fish don't die. So many real world applications to things that we use.
Even thinking about people who are, architects and people that work in fields that like electrician, is integrating those two different kinds of concepts.
How about just like housewives or people that are working on things?
We're baking and we're trying to. We're cooking, so I guess there's other places too.
Because then you have more time to focus on just one of them. At my classes, we have an hour and 20 minutes of science and an hour and 20 minutes of math. If we were to integrate them, they would all be kind of, the times would be mixed up, and you'd be learning one more than the
They
other.
don't. Well, I'm not gonna say they don't know it themselves, but like they don't know how to teach. They don't think they're supposed to be teaching them science if they're the math teacher. They think they're only supposed to be teaching them one thing.
Well, because really, like, classes, they're not meant to be together, I guess you could say, because a lot of, like, one teacher takes a course for teaching on math and another teacher takes a course on science. It's just like, they learn specifically on that kind of stuff, and then the other teacher learns specifically on that kind of stuff. So, like, classes are meant to, like, concentrate on one thing and then concentrate on another. Maybe, like, in college, maybe you can take a class that integrates both. But I think in, like, middle school, maybe, I think it's best to keep them separate, and then eventually at some point of their school year come together.
Teachers do this more often because they just want to stick to teaching their subject, like, strictly, I guess, and getting as much of their subject taught as possible.
Well, sadly, I think it might force teachers to stray a little bit out of their comfort zone. It might require, if they feel like they have a very good handle on their particular content area, even though it's, in my mind, completely accepted that these different content areas feed on one another and build on one another, it might be more comforting for a teacher to say that, that's being covered over in English, or that's being covered over in math class. I'm going to focus on the science, when I think we really do ourselves and our students a disservice by taking that mindset, because the more we can emulate the types of problems or scenarios that kids are going to experience in their real lives, I think the better we prepare them for that life.
That's the number one reason, time. I got to meet my requirements of my TEKS, and I'm sorry, but I can't meet your requirements and my requirements as priority over.
The schedule of a teacher is jam-packed and busy, and it takes a special time. You have to set aside time to go and to find a math teacher or another science teacher to collaborate. And so I really enjoy the collaboration. I find that the best lessons I have been the culmination of all kinds of disciplines and all kinds of teachers, but it's very time-consuming.
Zone and what you have instruction in. I have I'm a pure math teacher. That's all. I didn't take. I took geology and earth science when I was in college. I don't have a whole lot of mindset to help me try and integrate those things. So I would need to actually sit down with the science teacher and say, this is my curriculum, this is your curriculum, how can we have them fit together?